I never know exactly when to start. If in the auditorium, you look out, there's nobody there, so you're wondering, oh, I should keep waiting for someone to come. This morning, I want to talk about a very special topic to me, actually, a topic that's really been at the center of my life, in spiritual life, and certainly in my attempts at spiritual life. It's this idea of intimate prayer, of a real connection with the divine, with the beloved, to know love in its purest and most unadulterated state, mixed with nothing, in its infinity, in its breadth, depth, overwhelming capacity. It's something that all the mystics have spoken to, and have written volumes on. It's one of those topics that you can take any single point and talk the rest of your life about it. It goes forever deep. It's a challenging one because it seems so aloof and so far out of reach, and one immediately feels a sense of inner collapse when you approach the idea of touching God, touching the divine. And part of it is because of what the scriptures tell us, even when we start out. I was just talking up in the living room with some of the devotees about, even the descriptions of what's necessary for a student. And Swami Brahmarupananda found for me in the Vedanta Sara this passage on what is necessary for a student, for a qualifying student. It says that a competent student is an aspirant who, by studying in accordance with the prescribed method, the Vedas and the Vedangas, has obtained a general comprehension of the entire Vedas, who, being absolved from all sin in this or previous lives by the avoidance of actions known as kamya or nisidya, and by the performance of actions called nitya and naimittika, as well as by penance and devotion, has become entirely pure in mind, and who has adopted the four sadhanas or means to the attainment of spiritual knowledge. You hear something like that, and I remember I was telling the story that my first year in the monastery, I read that passage. Vedanta Sara is one of the first books that we study in the monastery, or there anyway. And I went to Swami Prabhupada immediately. I told him I need to go now. I don't even meet the qualifications of being a student. Where do I, where can I possibly go from here? And of course, Prabhupada smiled and he said, "Oh, see, that's for the ideal student. If one gets a student like that, when one bends over and whispers in their ear, 'Thou art that,' Tatvamasi, that they have their realization immediately. That's the qualifications for the perfect student." And so he comforted me, and so here I am 20 years later, still jumping, still barking at an airplane, as it were. Ramakrishna says, and Holy Mother also repeats what he says: one cannot realize God if one has even the least trace of desire. A thread cannot pass through the eye of a needle if it has the smallest fiber sticking out. You read that, and immediately the heart just collapses. You just, at least for me, you think, my goodness, there is no way that this can be done. I'll take what I've got and run to the bank and quit now. That's sort of the fruit, and I suspect, as we'll lay out here in the discussion, that that's part of the intended effect. It's a statement of truth. So, even though it turns out to be have an intended effect, it's not hyperbole. It's not overemphasizing a point for the sake of doing it. If you, as yourself, are going to find God and touch Him on your terms, or on by your efforts, these are the rules. This is the way it is. There is no other way. And it's one of the reasons, of course, that Sri Ramakrishna said that the fastest and most effective path toward the divine, or to the divine, in this day and age is devotion, the path of bhakti. Even in Christianity, which is a bhakti path, even in their statements like this are made. And the Apostle Matthew, he says, "Therefore be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." A direct command. He doesn't water it down at all. He said, "Be perfect as God is perfect." That's your command. And, good luck with that. Good luck with that. Swami Vivekananda, he lays out the path according to Raja Yoga. If you are in fact going to attempt this, and really you do have to attempt this, whatever the inspiration is, that will change. But the attempt must be made. He says the first things are doing. There's three things that are necessary for this path to get yourself going, and this is for bhaktas and for gyanis, for people following the path of devotion, following the path of meditation, following the path of action. These requirements are all there. All of them require this. He says three things are necessary for the student who wishes to succeed. First, and he starts with a doozy here, give up all ideas of enjoyment in this world and the next. Care only for God and truth. We are here to know truth, not for enjoyment. Leave that to the brutes who enjoy as we never can. Man is a thinking being and must struggle on until he conquers death, until he sees the light. He must not spend himself in vain talking that bears no fruit. Worship of society and popular opinion is idolatry. The soul has no sex, no country, no place, no time. It's a turning away. We have to let go of everything in the sensory and mental world. We have to lay it all down to approach the divine. He says, second, you must have an intense desire to know truth and God, not just as a hobby, not just something you do on the side, an intense desire to know, is this real? What is real if this isn't real? And if this is real, what is my relationship? Who am I in the face of that? And if there is a who am I, then what am I? What purpose lies in who I am? It really has to come to the point where that becomes a driving question for your day or your existence. Something that you might even border on the edge of madness in that intensity, as we saw in Sri Ramakrishna and actually many of the great saints who did in fact have their realization, have their vision of the beloved, of the divine. He says, third, there are 6 trainings that you have to go through. The first is restraining the mind from going outward. Now, when I first read that, didn't really even know what it meant, because for the mind to understand something, it has to have the 2 poles, it has to have the plus and the minus, the two dual perspectives. And my mind had always gone outward. I mean, I didn't know where else would it go. How can I find out anything without going outward? Because it's the first place we go for all of our answers. It's habitual. It's an addiction. You want to know how you're feeling. You immediately query the body. Am I cold? Am I hungry? Am I sick? Do I have a fever? You want to know what your mood is. You immediately query the mind. If you want to know how much vegetables are, you query the mind. And it's just a constant back and forth. You querying the mind and querying the body your whole life long. And when the scripture starts off, the first thing I have to train myself is to restrain my mind from going outward. Where is it going to go? What does an inward facing mind look like? The only thing that's inside you is that image of the beloved, the image of God, upon which you're created according to the Christian scriptures, according to Satchit Ananda in the Vedas and the Vedantic path, the Vedantic ways, that the only thing that's in there is that divinity, that infinity, that absolute intelligence, that absolute bliss or love, and that existence. Those are the things that you put attention on. Now, this is a tricky one because even in putting your attention on something, you've objectified it. You've made it separate from yourself. And so that's what makes this a very interesting practice to go through. And it's one that the scriptures say can only be really moved into by negation, by not attaching your attention to anything, not attaching your mind to anything, but a continual backing up, backing up, backing up. Now, that's extremely difficult, almost impossible, although it's very interesting to go through the exercise to find out how impossible it is. But that's why we're given the mantra, a name of God, a name of the beloved, to repeat. So at least you can give the baby a toy to play with while you do the while you do the real work. It's not the thing itself, but the name and the form can't be separated. So by saying the name of God within, it actually leads you to that manifestation, to the presence of that divine, of that beloved within you. The second of the six trainings, you have to restrain the senses. You have to stop feeding the animals. you can't you can't go on trying to withdraw the mind and at the same time keep jumping over the fence to feed your aversions and your attractions. You can't go on looking at your vices as being positive things or as rewards to yourself. I was reading a book one time on weight loss, and one of the things in the book that they said that was so obvious after they said it, you have to stop thinking that dessert is a reward to you. You have to understand that dessert is what has ruined you. It's what has brought you to your problem, to needing a book on weight loss. And that we need to change our perspectives on things, that it's not being kind to ourselves to let ourselves sleep in. It's not being helpful to ourselves to do what we want in the face of not doing what we need. And so to change that perspective, we have to bring the senses into control so that they're not the ones determining what we do and how we feel. We treat our friends wonderfully because they're our friend, not because we're in a good mood. We don't treat people based on the mood we're in. That's the point. It has to be moved past. We have to take charge of the senses. He says, third, turning the mind inward. Okay, now the first one was restraining it from going outward. That leaves you in a neutral place. This third one is turning the mind inward, focusing on the image of the beloved that is you. This requires a lot of practice because like I said, we have an addiction that we're trying to overcome, an addiction to thinking, an addiction to feeling, an addiction to perceiving. And so we have to cut that off, and then we have to practice going inward. And going inward is really trying to focus on the I am, just the being, letting this moment be absolute, not letting the past make any impression on the present moment, not letting the past define anything in the present moment, not letting the past interpret anything in the present moment, and blocking out any notion of this false idea of a future, so that this moment does not become about a projection, about fulfilling something or getting something or going somewhere or needing something. That this moment is all that there is. The sages all tell us that. So putting the mind inward is doing that. It's taking it off of this false idea of past and future, which allows you then to practice karma yoga, that doing something for its own sake in the moment. Anything done in the moment for its own sake is worship. It is an offering to the divine, to the love, because that's all that exists in the pure moment. And so turning in the mind is doing that, shutting out the past, shutting out the future, and shutting out any sense of identity that comes from anywhere outside that inner space. So it's shutting out the ideas of body, shutting out the ideas of gender, shutting out the ideas of sex, shutting out the ideas of name and fame, social standing, all of those things, and putting your whole self into just that love that will become apparent the closer you come to being able to taking your mind off of all of these other things, to put your mind on that love and to really sit in that space. Fourth, suffering everything without murmuring. This is the next practice, suffering everything without murmuring, having no preference or aversion. It's a real challenge. Somebody puts that pile of well, for me, it would be bitter melon on my plate, to sit there and take that and feel no aversion for it, and with the exact same practice, if somebody puts a nice big pile of French fries on my plate, or tater tots, that would be better, to have no sense of preference for that. That's our practice. And how do you do that? By being purely in the moment. As you eat a French fry, don't be querying the mind about the taste of the French fry. Don't be stealing that enjoyment immediately, just like you don't appreciate a flower before you put it on the shrine. You don't smell a flower before offering it to God. Why? Because it's the divine's flower to smell. You wouldn't rob or make the offering impure by taking some of it for yourself before offering it. And this idea of turning the mind inward, being in the moment, and suffering everything in equanimity, is the same practice. It's not querying for opinions or analysis of something. It's offering it immediately. So you take that flavor that's in your mouth. Yes, it's there, but you make no opinion. You form no opinion on it. You offer it to the beloved, and if you want, for the fun of it, ask his or her opinion of that. Do you like that, Ma? Thakur, do you like that? You know, and then you can tell him that you like it after you've offered it. So this whole idea of not letting your aversions and your attractions push you around, not letting them make your decisions on how you're acting or how you're feeling or whether you're happy or sad, not letting them define you in any way, but being absolutely free of their influence. That is our fourth training. Our fifth training, according to Vivekananda in his Raja Yoga, is the fastening the mind to one idea. Take the subject before you and think it out. Never leave it. Do not count time. All right, do not count time. That's a nice one. But he says, make the mind singular. Don't just sit there and let it wander, everywhere. The way to do this, or a way to do this, I found from the Buddhist scriptures, is to watch what's happening, not identifying with it. Watch the contents of the mind, and instead of putting the attention on what's happening in the mind, instead of putting the attention on the changing things in the mind, pay attention to who's watching. Try and feel, you can't put your attention on who's watching because it's the self, it's the divine who's watching. In reality, it's God himself who is watching. But sit there and see yourself as the watcher, and do it sort of through your peripheral vision. When you kind of look at something and you see something off to the side, but you don't look at it, you know that it's there. It's the same kind of sensation. You sit there and watch the mind change, but not so much watching what you're actually focusing on or what the eye is seeing, but focus on the sense of what's in the peripheral vision, the watcher, and just put your attention on that which is not changing in the scenario. When if you practice yoga or if you exercise, this is a great thing to do when you're exercising, because usually if you're doing your exercise and your body's getting tired, if you focus on that getting tired and you think that it's you getting tired, then you quit. You just can't do it. But the trick of yoga is to not pay attention to the moving parts. The moving parts have nothing to do with it. Use that changing as your indication of ignoring. Don't think about that. Within you, look at the exerciser. Pay attention to that which is not changing, even in your exercise. And it's very interesting. You find that you do not need to quit, that arm can go on being tired, and you can ignore the indication by not identifying with it, by focusing on that part of you which is not moving, even in the midst of that physical movement. So he's saying that, put the mind on that unchanging. Try and sense that unchanging self, which is watching what's changing in the mind, which is experiencing what's changing in the body, but is separate and apart from it. And the more you're able to make that distinction, the more these other practices actually begin to flow more naturally. The sixth one, think constantly of your real nature. Get rid of superstition. Do not hypnotize yourself into a belief in your own inferiority. Day and night, tell yourself what you really are until you actually realize, he emphasizes, your oneness with God. So this is a wonderful thing. Don't be hypnotized into an idea of what you are. Let the moment define what you are, and let the scriptures help you with that. Let the teachers help you with that. You are, in essence, the image of the beloved. You are, in essence, absolute love, absolute purity, immortal, unchanging, ever free, always content, tranquil, peaceful. All of those things. You are strong, you are successful, you have already attained the goal. All of it is within you. Everything else is merely a reflection of yourself. Don't let any negativity into the mind. It's always something, one of the things that I've always emphasized for myself, not very not very successfully, but this idea that, treating others as you treat yourself. First, you have to know how you treat yourself. Are you kind to yourself? Are you encouraging to yourself? Are you positive about yourself? Are you optimistic about yourself? Do those qualifications of love, do you apply them in the way that you treat yourself? Do you do what's best for yourself? To know how to love others, we have to really start with loving ourselves, because that's the standard by which all the sages call us to treat everyone. So we have to make sure that we're healthy on the inside. And we do that by a constant remembering, he's saying, of what our nature is, not what our body is, not what the condition of our mind is, not what our state of emotion is, not on how much money we're making or whether we've achieved certain goals or whether our parents approve or whether anybody else thinks we've become something. We judge ourselves by the standard of the beloved within, being fully present in the moment, manifesting more than doing. That's what he's asking us here to do. Now, these are very tall orders. All of these are extremely difficult. And when you started off with the first things that we talked about on becoming an ideal student and not having a single fiber sticking out of desire, in the world, and going back to what the Vedanta was, Sara was saying, to have mastered all of the Vedas, to have studied them, and to have been absolutely pure in mind. These are very tall orders. And in the Great Master, Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Shardananda, says about the Master some very interesting things. And it's based on Ramakrishna's very special relationship with Girish Ghosh. Uh, one of our, I think almost everybody identifies with Girish Ghosh to a certain extent. He was a real bohemian, an alcoholic who would drink and go and visit the Master at the temple while he was drunk. That's like going home to visit your mother when you're skipping school. It's just going right into it. And the Master had a very special arrangement, as many of us have heard from the Master. And the Master said, well, just think of me twice a day, before breakfast and after dinner. And Girish was like, can't guy, just can't really guarantee that I can do that, once a day. The Master just gets simpler and simpler. And Girish really knows, really knows himself. He knows he's come to that point where he knows, I have nothing to bring to this table. I have nothing to offer here. I there is nothing here, you know. That humility had become absolute. That humility had become absolute for him. And in that, the Master says, well, just give me the power of attorney in your life. And Girish, he says at the first, he thought, oh, wow, what a bargain. All I have to do is give the responsibility of everything to God, and I don't have to do anything. And that's exactly right. You don't have to do anything. As a matter of fact, you don't do anything that's outside of the will of the beloved, outside of the will of God. And so the Master wanted to clarify, what does that mean? And so here from the Great Master, it says, even when running after the various things of the world to become happy, man really feels that what he has attained is a shadow without reality. Even when performing spiritual practices, japa, and austerities, he feels in his heart of hearts that it can never be an adequate price for the attainment of the infinite Lord. And even when employing unsparingly all means and methods with the hope and faith of moving mountains by the sheer force of perseverance, he realizes that he has no power to move a straw. It is only then that he begins to cry aloud in the plaintive voice, "O you protector, whoever and wherever you are, save me." And it is then that the Lord accepts his power of attorney. So I really believe that these other teachings are there because they are the only way to God. We are absolutely responsible to being absolutely pure in mind, to knowing the Vedas inside and out, to not having a single shred of desire sticking out from our inner self. But in the face of all that, until we come to the same understanding that Girish had, this understanding of, wow, I have done everything. I have tried so hard, and I'm almost nothing. It's come to naught. My habits are still there. My mind still wanders. I still can't sit and think of the beloved for a second or two in a row without wandering somewhere else. When we come to that absolute humility, only then is absolute grace available to us. That's one of my favorite little mantras, is that infinite grace requires infinite humility. You can't have full grace until you understand that you give nothing, you know? And that's a very difficult place to reach. And you can't reach there through cognition. You can't reach there just through thinking it out and coming to the point where you can glibly say in the conscious mind, oh, I'm nothing. Oh, I can't do anything. This is one of those deep seated things that has to come from the inside out, not from the top down. It has to come from the bottom up, that primordial cry from within, where you feel the complete falseness of this self that has considered itself to be independent and separate from the beloved, this understanding that it had no existence, and that any fragment of a belief in it was a direct affront to God. That is the only idolatry. Idolatry is not in the number of images you have sitting in a temple. It's how much you worship yourself and serve yourself as being separate and apart from God. You are the idol that you worship. That is the idol to be broken. That is the idol to be cast aside, to be forgotten. When we come to that point, as we move slowly to that point, that is when prayer becomes intimate. That is when we begin to set an inner scene. Thomas Merton, a Christian monk and mystic, in his book, The Contemplative Prayer, says, but more and more our efforts attain a new orientation, okay, this new orientation that we're moving toward. Instead of being directed toward ends, instead of doing things for something or to get something from them, we have chosen ourselves instead of being measured by the profit and pleasure we judge, and instead of judging ourselves by the pleasure that we will get from these things, more and more we are directed to an obedient and cooperative submission to grace. I like that. This idea, an obedient, that's you laying down any will that's contrary to the beloved, contrary to pure love. And a cooperative submission, not the submission of a slave. This is the self coming to know itself. There's a cooperation here. There's a benevolence involved here. There's a sweet undoing combined with a sweeter realization happening here. So it's a wonderful co-productive space inside where you sit with the beloved. He says that this orientation begins to change, and a submission to grace, and that was what we were talking about. The idea that the beloved has you covered at every angle. That wonderful story when I think it was Rama, whose devotee got attacked by somebody, and Rama jumped up and told Sita, I have to run and to help this person. And so he runs to help the person, and then he turns around and comes right back, and Sita says, well, that was fast. Why are you back? How are you back already? He said, oh, well, I was running to help my devotee, but they picked up a brick to throw at their attacker so they can take care of themselves. That's this notion. That person who picked up the brick gave up the help of God by relying on that lower self, relying on the ego self. And what a tragedy for him, what a tragedy in that regard. And so this is what we're doing. It's that space of absolute surrender where we're approaching the beloved, not even in an asking, not even in an asking. So we set this space where we're directed toward an obedient and cooperative submission to grace, which implies, first of all, an increasingly attentive and receptive attitude toward the hidden action of this Holy Spirit. So that idea, it ties into that idea of trying to put the mind inward, of trying to sense that unchanging self, which you can't put your attention on because it's the source of the attention. It can't be objectified. It's coming into that space where really your job is to be infinitely receptive, infinitely open, infinitely sensitive to the inner presence of God, the inner presence of the divine. And any manifestation that comes from that space, or any impetus that comes from that space, you manifest. You manifest. You don't cognate and calculate. It happens because it is what you are. Its isness, its link to the present moment is absolute. There's no time difference between that. So we're looking for this increasingly attentive and receptive attitude in our meditation, in our prayer, where we are just opening and opening and opening and opening. It is precisely the function of meditation, in the sense in which we speak of it here, to bring us to this attitude of awareness and receptivity. It also gives us strength. It gives us hope, along with a deep awareness of the value of interior silence, in which the mystery of God's love is made clear to us. By having nothing to offer, by having an understanding of who and what you are, in this space. I'm counting on faith for all of you to hear me. I didn't put the mic on properly. But this we cultivate this inner space, this inner receptivity, this ear. We become an ear to God. We become an ear to the beloved. He says one cannot begin to face the real difficulties of the life of prayer and meditation unless one is first perfectly content to be a beginner. I read this earlier in the week in one of our daily blogs. To lay down what you think you know, to approach God, even if you've been doing this your whole life, to approach God as an absolute beginner. There was a wonderful thing that my teacher told me early on about reading the scripture. She said, you must always understand that no matter how many times you think that you have read the scripture, the moment that you're reading the scripture now is your first. She said, if you assume you've read it before, then all you will learn from it is what you learned the first time you read it. She said, if you read it new in the moment, knowing that the whole universe has changed since that previous reading, that these words will be touching a whole new sense of mind, then they become living, they become real, they change, and you hear the lesson that's necessary and appropriate now for you. So always approach your practice as if it's the very first time, always fresh and always new. If you don't, the trouble is boredom. The trouble is frustration. The trouble is dryness. Those things all come when you are doing them for the thousandth time. But when you realize that only the moment is real, that there is no past and no future, no need and no guilt, then the freedom of reading and being there for the first time will feed you in a wonderful way. So he goes on here, be perfectly content to be a beginner and really experience himself as one who knows little or nothing and has a desperate need to learn the bare rudiments. Those who think they know from the beginning will never, in fact, come to know anything. This is something very good. I know as an American, we really cherish knowing everything. I remember my first month in the monastery. I was convinced I had something to teach. I was terribly disappointed that nobody was asking or paying attention. And this is that problem of everybody wanting to be a guru and nobody wanting to be a student. And it's a desperate, horrible trap to fall into. Even after 1,000 years of practice, we barely qualify as a beginner just like those quiet requirements to be the ideal student. We don't even qualify to be a student. Let that be a meditation. In all of your efforts, you haven't even yet qualified to become a student. So this is this is the attitude. This is what it means to have that relationship with God, knowing that He's got you covered. This is what it means to accept grace and to open to its changing. He says, in the prayer of the heart, we seek first of all the deepest ground of our identity with God. We seek to gain a direct existential grasp, a personal experience of the deepest truth of life and faith, finding ourselves in God's truth. Inner certainty depends on purity. You see how this is starting to tie together all of the requirements, into one. That yes, we have to do all of those requirements, but in the end, none of them was the thing that introduced us to God. What all of these requirements and all of these practices do is undo all of the wrong impurities of mind, all of the wrong ideas you have of yourself, all of the inaccurate learning that you've acquired about what God is and what you are and what life is and what your life is about. All of that has to be swept away through these processes and through these practices, which don't actually take you any nearer to God, but only reveal to you how absolutely near you have always been and always will be, that it is impossible, utterly impossible, to be separate from the beloved. Narada continues in his book on the divine way of love. The practitioner achieves dispassion in a smooth and natural way. Now, this is Swami Turiyananda talking. Let me give an example from the ordinary life of worldly-minded people. A man loves a woman, and after a while he's attracted by another woman and begins to love her. Ram, 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 like in here Swami Prabhupada already. And he lets the first woman go. She's wiped out of his mind smoothly and gently without his feeling a want for her at all. So he's giving a rather saucy example here of what bhakti does within our heart. All of this denying or putting aside the external world, all of this shutting out the senses and giving up all of our enjoyments and giving up all of the things that we find delightful in our ignorant state, that it becomes much easier, it becomes quite natural and gentle and ordinary when we begin to touch the beloved, when we begin to fill the mind with that self, which is unchanging, ever stable and pure, ever accessible, when the cloud of the mind is not blocking it out. One of the Desert Fathers around the beginning of the millennium writes, he says, "Behold, my beloved, I have shown you the power of silence, how thoroughly it heals and how fully pleasing it is to God. Wherefore I have written to you to show yourselves strong in this work you have undertaken, so that you may know that it is by silence that the saints grew, that it is by silence that the power of God dwelt in them, because of silence that the mysteries of God were known to them." This is intimate prayer. This is sitting in the presence of God and not making any room even for a thought about it. Not making any room for any opinion about it, not even recognizing the enjoyment of it. It's that absolute stillness, the absolute peace of the soul. And that is all that you have to offer to God. That absolutely surrendered, resigned presence, that receptivity, that attitude of absolute openness to the being, to the I am that's within you. In a very famous book from the 15th century written by an unknown Christian mystic called The Cloud of Unknowing, he says here, he gives us a clue. He says, "One thing I tell you, all the things that you think about, it floats over you at present. It floats between you and your beloved. And as far as you feel from the divine, Remove this cloud of thought and leave only the presence of God. He's saying there, anything that you're thinking about, anything that you're cognating in your mind, any analysis that you're building, any philosophical knowledge that you've accumulated, he says all of that thought is floating like a cloud of unknowing, which is the title of the book, floats like a cloud of unknowing, a darkness that prevents you from seeing God, prevents you from seeing the beloved. And so he says, therefore, I would abandon all things of which I can think, and choose to subject my love that thing that I cannot think. This is that whole point. Anything that you can think of is not God. Anything that you can objectify is not it. It is not the thing. And it's one of our big misunderstandings, many times, and I see it over years and years of sitting through classes, the love that we have for building thought castles in our mind, that, we question the nature of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Oh, Maharaj, does that mean such and such and such and such? It's literally dogs barking at airplanes. It's concerning ourselves with these finer points of these saints' realizations and these meticulous, points of philosophy that they know, uh, which have nothing to do with where we're at in spiritual life, has nothing to do with our experience of the divine, but it gives us that egotistic satisfaction of knowing that false security that we've got the truth, that we know the path, that the Sanatana Dharma is ours. It's a complete spoof. There is nothing there. Anything that you can think blocks you from the experience of the divine. Now, does that mean you don't have to learn anything? I hope that's not what you're getting from this lecture. You absolutely have to learn. You have to learn so much that you realize it's done nothing for you. You have to practice it so hard that you know without a doubt that it didn't get you there. And you can't do it. You can't circumvent that process. You have to go through the exercise, until that grace descends, until for whatever reason, under whatever circumstance, and probably just like Thakur says, like a child's whim, mother releases you, mother lets you go from that. But to know it is not the thing, and knowing all of these things intellectually is not the thing. It's not the thing. It is only helpful by getting you prepared for knowing that it is not the thing. So he says, only by love may he be gotten and held, but never by thought. Therefore, although it is good to think of his kindness and of his worthiness in particular, and though it is positive and a part of contemplation, nevertheless, in this work it should be torn down and forgotten. In that silence of prayer, in that inner communion, in that inner meditation, in that practice of the presence of God, all of it has to be laid down. Don't think about it. Don't employ the mind. Only the pure mind and God are the same. And the pure mind is the mind that's completely undisturbed by thought, completely undisturbed by cognition, by identity. It doesn't have your finger in it. Oh, that's my thought. Oh, that's a good thought. Oh, that's a bad thought. Oh, that every time you stick your finger out with an opinion like that, you stir the water of the mind, and God can no longer be seen in his absolute form, or formlessness, or however you can talk about the non-objectified self. It's impossible. So he says it should be torn down and forgotten, absolutely laid aside, and you must step above it boldly but gently, with a devout and pleasing stirring of love, and try to pierce that darkness of thinking above you. Strike at that thick cloud of unknowing with a sharp dart of longing love, and do not move from there for anything that changes. Isn't that a beautiful ideal? that you should have no judgments toward the mind. Don't get agitated by the mind, because that's part of the problem. You only would get agitated because you are identifying with it. You know, you're not being perfectly present in the moment. You're sticking an I in there, a small I. So have no opinion about the mind. Have no opinion about the quality of your prayer, the quality of your meditation. Have no idea of me and mine at all. Don't own any of it. Only focus on letting that love manifest, feeling of love that becomes slowly apparent to you. Again, I remember the words of Swami Tattvamayinanda when I was helping him move in his room. You know, he had 14 volumes of his unpublished works. That was such a humbling moment for me. But he had 14 volumes of unpublished works that I was putting on the shelf. And I was, being amazed, like, oh my God, 14 volumes of unpublished work. I said, I don't even think I have a napkin of unpublished work. My summary of both published and unpublished is a napkin at best. And so I was talking about that. We stopped and had this conversation. He said one of the most wonderful things to me. He said, he says, all of that writing, all of the scriptures, he says, they don't tell you anything of God. I was like, whoa, what are you talking about? How is that possible? He says, no, they only tell you what God is not, so that in the end, that which is obvious can become apparent. And this is exactly what's being pointed at here. It's a matter of undoing all of this pile of malarkey that we've piled on our sense of I, all of these attributes that we've held on to, our bank accounts and our skin colors and our nationalities and our genders and our preferences and our sexes and the things we don't like, and thousands of heaps and heaps of literal manure. And we're underneath it, this beautiful gem, this beautiful diamond. It's like literally, in Germany growing up, there used to be out in front of every farm was what was called the Mistplatz. And this is where all of the you know poop, all of the crap and manure from the cows and the pigs was piled up into this big pile out in front in the Mistplatz. And and then that was what went on the fields for fertilization in the fall. And that is what we look like to the beloved when we insist on our own self, when we insist on being separate and apart, when we come making our noise, And the reality of it is that we are not all of that. We are like a diamond sitting at the very bottom of one of these giant Mistplatzes. You would never see it. You would never even know it's there. But once all of it's cleaned away, once all of that stuff gets washed away, there it is, this beautiful, unsullied diamond, as pure and as lovely as it ever was, regardless of how much manure was sitting on top of it. And this is our practice, my friends. This is what we're trying to do. Let go of the manure. Let go of these the 30 feet of trash that we've accumulated and identified with and hugged and called ourselves so lovingly, to realize, when the drug of ego stops, that we're hugging a pile of manure. We're hugging we're hugging nothingness at best, and something certainly very stinky at worst. And so to let go of that, to stop it, that's what the scriptures are for. They're not there to tell you of God, because nothing can be said of God. God is not an object. God cannot be thought about. That's why they're saying any thought that you're having is a cloud of unknowing. It's a darkness between you and the beloved, and you can't see God because of it. And so all of the scriptures are there to help you remove that, not to add to it, not to tell you something about God. They're there to remove what you think you know about God, and to put you in that space of understanding and accepting that you will always be less than a beginner, that you have not yet even qualified for being that student. So he says, he says, strike that thick cloud of unknowing with that sharp dart of longing love, that longingness for God, that longingness that it's all about the beloved. The best lover is one who has no thought of him or herself, but only the beloved, completely resigned, completely thrown down. There is nothing in between. He says, take a word such as God or love. He's talking about a mantra. This is that cloud of unknowing. So this unknown monk from the 15th century. He's saying, take a word such as God. Say the word God, or say your mantra. For us as Vedantins, we've got a mantra, a name of God, or a phrase that points at the beloved. He says, fasten this word to your heart so that it never wanders for any reason. If any thought presses you for what you want, answer that thought with no word other than this word alone. So as you sit in that stillness of self, any desire, anything interesting in the mind, anything tantalizing in any way arrives and asks you anything or tries to put any attribute on you whatsoever, especially the measure of time, your only response, the only thing that comes out of you is this name of the beloved, the word love, the word God, or your mantra. That is the only response that you have to any query of the body, to any interest that the mind has, to sit there. It's very entertaining in that practice of watching the mind pass, of not, your attempt to not identify with any of it and not have an opinion. You don't cognate about it. You don't think about it at all. You just simply let it come and go. And if you're able to do that for even a split second, there is a wonderful bliss that comes up inside. And the very funny part of it is that, as soon as you notice that, the thought comes, I'm having a good meditation, or, oh, what a lovely feeling. You objectify and own. Me and mine comes creeping back into that picture again, and it's gone. Your great meditation is gone. That wonderful realization is gone. And you're left wondering, oh my gosh. And then you go looking for a good meditation. Good meditations happen when there is no object. You can't find a good meditation. You are the good meditation. Thou art that. So we've got to stop looking for it. That's why Vivekananda says, he says, stop seeking God. For goodness gracious, stop seeking God. See him. It's becoming an awareness of what is. Letting in Tattvamananda's words again, letting that which is obvious become apparent. Swami Turiyananda, we're going to close with his statement here. He says, my master often urged us to practice. It is through the practice of the presence of God in the heart that we begin to feel the overwhelming love for God and God's love for us. And love for him comes naturally. Practice, meditate. These are the words of my master, still ringing clearly in my ears. With that understanding, we do all of the rest of it. All of those requirements of becoming a good student or becoming a worthy student, all of those requirements for realization are no longer done for realization. They are done because of our faith that realization already is within us. They become a response to love, a response to a relationship, a response to a grace, a response to an unmeasurable love, and not the search for it, not the quest for it, not something that we're trying to buy, which has an infinite cost. So that is intimate prayer. That's the ideal. When you sit for meditation, don't try and find God. Enjoy God. Don't try and have a pure mind. Enjoy purity. Don't look for stillness. Enjoy the stillness. Always keep your attention on that part of you which has always been still, has always been pure, has always been blissful, has always been present. And don't let the ideas of the past define anything. And don't let any of your hopes of the future cause a reaction for anything. Stay where you have always been. Know that no matter what it looks like, The place you are is always called here, and the time is always now.